Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Patriots History. I'm Larry Swikart, co-author of Patriots History of the United States with Michael Allen, and your host here on this show. As always, I am reading from the 15th anniversary edition. As always, if you have an earlier edition, the pages may not line up, but the headers will. If you go back too much before the 10th edition, a lot won't line up. We made a lot of changes since then, so buy an updated edition. Last time, in fact, the last two times, I read from George Washington's inaugural address, which was taken out of sequence. So I went back in and made that lesson 54A. So you might want to go back and read that. It doesn't hurt to read it out of sequence too much. And then I read Marbury v. Madison in sequence, the whole case. So now we're back to reading from the book itself. And I am on page 175. And the header is, "We rush like a comet into infinite space." Now, before I get started, I want to just mention something I had in my news items. If you don't know, Monday through Friday at www.uncoverdc.com. That's uncover, not undercover. Uncoverdc.com. Monday through Friday, I do a column called Today's News. And I look at 20 to 40 of the latest news topics. I try to find things that you won't see everywhere. Obviously, I try to cover the bigs, but I also try to cover stuff you might not see otherwise. And there was a very good article. I think it's called the Martin Center for Academic Excellence. I'm not sure. I know the word Martin is in there, but you can check today's news from today. And the article was about, now is the time to rebuild academic history departments. And so before I start reading, I thought you might find this interesting, because I taught at a major U.S. university for 31 years, the University of Dayton in Ohio. It was and is a liberal arts college, about 6,000 full-time students, 10,000 if you include the law school and the business school. And it is a residential campus. They want kids to live there, not commute. And it is a Marianist Catholic school, a school founded by the Society of Mary. I am not Catholic, but as I like to joke, I felt more Catholic than the entire religious studies department, and I'm a Southern Baptist. But what I wanted to point out here is just take a little detour here from reading Patriots history, and let me explain to you what colleges are like and how departments get the way they get. So you have a faculty. I think when I came on board University of Dayton, we had 12 or 13 full-time history professors. Professors are divided into assistant professors. That's the lowest level, usually not tenured, on what's called the tenure track, which is probation. They are watching you to see if you can publish, if your teaching is solid, and so on. Then you have the associate professors. That's the second level. And that's usually the first rank you have when you are first tenured, when you have, let's say, just one book or 3 articles, which was our standard for promotion and tenure to each rank at the University of Dayton, either a new book or 3 additional articles. And then you have full professor, which is the highest rank, most pay, some choice in scheduling. Usually you would have such perks as your choice of offices. You would get first dibs on whether or not to teach summer school, which was quite lucrative, because even though it cut into your summer a little, you got paid like regular pay, but condensed into just 6 weeks. So it really was a perk to teach summer school. You got other kind of benefits by being a full professor. When you retire, you can choose to have emeritus status. I did not want that because I wasn't going to stay in Dayton, and I didn't figure that any of the advantages it offered would help me. Excuse me. One of the big advantages is you get to still use the library system, which is something of an advantage. You get the title emeritus, big deal. I didn't always use the title professor or doctor. I was very happy with Mr., which is what they call professors at Cambridge and Oxford. So anyway, so we had about 20 assistant, associate, full-time professors when I was at the university. When I was hired. I was hired on a non-tenure track status, meaning they expected me to be there for 3 years and be gone. I had other plans, and I did well enough. I did so well that they converted my position to a tenure track position, and I got tenure right on schedule. And I got promoted right on schedule to full professor. So I served on a number of search committees. Now, this is the part where it gets important for why college faculties are as they are. A search committee usually is comprised of 3 to 5 members of the faculty, chosen by the chairman or chairwoman, not chair it or chair thing. And there's a chairman of the search committee whose job it is to keep everything moving along on schedule and to do all the paperwork, which is a pain in the rectal cavity, I'll tell you. So I served on many of these, maybe 5 or 6 of these. I was the chairman of a couple. And usually the procedure is this: you post a job position in all the places where applicants, that is, graduating history students, are likely to see your application. The newsletters of the American Historical Association, Organization of American Historians, you send it in a blast email, which we didn't have until the early 2000s, to all history departments around the country. And you'll almost immediately, within a week of that going out, you'll get applications. Because as you can imagine, the desire to get one of these positions, especially if you can get tenure, is high. These are deeply sought after positions. And typically, especially from about 95 to 2005 or 6, we would get 40 or 50 applications for a job in a fairly narrowly defined field, such as medieval historian. Must be able to teach 800 to 1600 AD, Western Europe, and then a minor in religious studies preferred, but that was only preferred. Teaching experience preferred. We would always put that in, teaching experience preferred. And we'd still get 50 or 60 applications, of which some had 0 teaching whatsoever. Being a TA, a teaching assistant at a college, doesn't count as teaching experience. We wanted people who had actually taught a class, had to keep a grade book, had to meet a schedule, had to undergo student evaluations, that kind of thing. And believe me, I'm not a huge fan of student evaluations. I did really well. I scored a perfect one semester. I was always in the top third of the university, always in the top third of the department, but I never thought that the students were qualified to evaluate me. I thought my colleagues were, But the students really didn't know if they were learning something or not. Because as you know, often you learn stuff and you don't even think about it, and then it comes up years later and go, oh yeah, I learned that back in history, or I learned that in home ec class. Anyway, neither here nor there. So we would get 40 or 50 applications. The search committee would go through these. Now, an application consisted of a curriculum vitae, which lists all the important information about the candidate, their name, address, their background, educational schooling, their background, any teaching experience they had. Sorry, just recently, the more I talk, the more I start to get this. Any teaching experience they've had, all of their publications, even down to book reviews. You wanted to see anything that would show you this person knows how to get published, and they can get published in decent journals. A journal such as Journal of Southern History, American Historical Review, very few people are getting that. I haven't. Journal of American History, very elite. Journal of Southern History is very elite. I got published in that. Journal of Economic History, Civil War History, Pacific Historical Review. I got published in that. That's a very big one. So, can they get published? And then you put on your vita anything else that might be relevant to you teaching a class. Well, I did voluntary instruction at such and such community college for such and such a program. Any museum or archival experience you might have had, like, well, I ran a museum project for some company. All right, so we would get these 40 or 50 of these applications, and the search committee would weed them out, and we needed to come up with about 20 names that we would invite for an interview at the national meeting of either the American Historical Association, the Organization of American Historians, usually the AHA, because it met between Christmas and New Year's. Usually it met in one of the really big cities: New York, San Francisco, Chicago, Houston, New Orleans, Dallas, something like that. For one reason, they wanted everybody to attend, so they tried to put it in a city that these historians would want to go to. They wouldn't put it in, Phoenix. He meant to go to Phoenix, that kind of thing. So we would then schedule interviews, 15 to 20-minute interviews with these 20 candidates. All 5 of the faculty would be involved in the interviews. You would divide up ahead of time who's going to ask what questions. One person would usually ask a teaching question. How would you propose to teach? We have a Western Civ component from the French Revolution, the president. How would you propose to teach that? What would be your approach? Blah, blah, blah. We would have a research question. What was your dissertation about? And the key was, why is it important? You'd be surprised how many people flunk out with this one. Just an aside, we were interviewing a guy at the University of Dayton for a full-time lectureship position, and his dissertation was on baseball. Fine, no problem. I have no problem against dissertations on sports, but why is it important? Show me how your research translates into the big picture of American history. What does this have to say about American history, let's say from 1920 to 1950? What was baseball doing that reflected these bigger trends, right? Couldn't do it. I mean, it was almost like every question came down to, well, Ty Cobb hit this percentage in such and such a year. It was really narrow, as we say, small ball, really narrow stuff. So he got out. So the research question was key. Obviously, dissertations by their nature are going to be very narrowly focused because there's so many people doing so much research. You can't just write a new biography of George Washington for a dissertation. It won't fly anymore. You have to show why your research into Washington was somehow different than everybody else's. So out of those 20 people, we would then come back and discuss. Now, all this time, the whole faculty had access to all those folders and all those files and could make recommendations. I really like to see you interview this person from Loyola of Chicago. I knew his advisor there, and this guy's going to be a great fit for UD. And we would take that into consideration. If our colleagues told us we really would like you to see something. Now, if we interviewed them and they were terrible, we'd come back, we'd say, they had a terrible interview. We also had to fill out forms on how many Blacks, how many Hispanics, how many women, blah, 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 we interviewed. We didn't have a quota that we were required to interview any number, but it was understood if these candidates were out there, you made every effort to try to give them a chance, to give them an interview. Now, at my university, early on, a colleague and I thought that the process was a little bit rigged in favor of the big schools, the prestigious schools, the Stanfords, the Cal Berkeleys, the Northwesterns, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, all the Ivy League schools, University of North Carolina. And so we created something called the PET rule. I'm very proud of that. And the PET rule was that any faculty member could request an interview for anybody. So if they didn't make our top 20 list, a faculty member could say, I really want you to look at Susan James over here. I once saw a presentation of hers. I think she'd be fantastic. Okay. But the main reason we put this in was because we thought, the fellow who worked with me to develop this, we thought that the smaller, I don't want to say smaller schools, not small in size, but the less prestigious schools like University of Oklahoma, Arizona State University, University of Idaho, University of Kansas, right? Those kinds of schools, North Carolina State, that they were not being well represented in this because of bias, prejudice against non-prestigious names. And so I would say over the 20 years that I was on these committees, we may have had 3 or 4 pets. I named one. And one of them actually got a campus invite, which was the next stage. Most didn't make it out of the interviews, which was fine. They got their shot. We saw why they went to, let's say, University of Oklahoma versus Stanford or Northwestern or whatever. It became apparent, but they got a shot. What was equally interesting, folks, was that virtually all of the candidates who came from the Ivy League, especially Harvard or Yale or Columbia, washed out. They were always terrible. They were always so focused on their little area of research, they ran into that baseball problem. They couldn't explain why it was important. They had no idea what was going on in the broader sense of America, let alone of history. And I think without exception, the Harvard, Yale, Princetonians washed out easily because we could say, number one, they couldn't explain how their research was meant anything. But number two, it was very clear if they couldn't show that they could teach because they were so into this one little area of, I don't know, shoes and Sweden from 1612 to 1614, something like that, right? And so they all washed out as well. We did best with people who'd had some teaching experience at a junior college level who could explain their research in broader concepts and who had enough publishing record, either in terms of an article. You're a college student, so we don't expect you to have more than one article if you're lucky, because they take a couple of years just to get accepted and printed. But if you had a couple of articles in lower tier journals and you had some book reviews, that showed us you knew how to publish and you at least had a track record of getting some stuff out. Okay. So over the years, we'd go through this process. Now, the third step in the process, we'd winnow down the 20 names to 3, and we would give 3 people an invitation to come to campus. On campus, they would make 2 presentations, a lunchtime presentation where they'd speak to the whole faculty and students who were invited about their research. And we thought the students were an important part of this, because if the students were always turned off by somebody, and usually they weren't, usually they tried to be pretty generous. Well, he didn't do so well in this area, but he was pretty good in this area, that kind of thing. Almost never did we hear, boy, don't hire that guy, he sucks. We never got that. But then they would do a research presentation to anybody who was in, anybody could come in. We tried to invite a lot of students, all the faculty were there. A teaching presentation, I'm sorry, teaching presentation. And that usually was a make or break, because if it looked like you couldn't teach a basic Western Civ class, you had no business at our university, which was a teaching university. Yes, our people were expected to do research, but we didn't have a PhD program. We didn't have PhD students. So your job, your job man, was going to be teaching. If you couldn't teach, you had no place. So over the years, we hired a number of really good people. Unfortunately, I'd say 2/3 of them were lured away to better schools. Understandable. One really good Roman historian went to Tufts. A really good Russian historian went to the U.S. Naval Academy. And where'd the other guy go? Anyway, we had a pretty good French historian who went to Ohio State. So you can imagine a smaller school is always going to lose faculty to more prestigious schools. But every once in a while, you'd have people, myself included, but I know some others, who liked Dayton. We got to be happy there. We raised a family there. And Dayton was a great place to work. I will have nothing bad to say about teaching at the University of Dayton. They treated me very well. I use the old line from Saturday Night Live. You've been very, very good to me. And so they protected me there. They funded all my research. It was a good employer. So, you know, we might lose some, but we would keep a few really, really good ones. I had a colleague who was a historian of science, really good, top of the line, as good as you'd want in the country. We had a colleague of mine, friend, who was a German historian, fantastic. I mean, students just loved him, but he had good research too. So anyway, we bring these 3 people in, they do these 2 presentations, and then the committee would get together and vote. And these would often be knockdown, drag out things where you're pulling up this aspect of a person's vita or this part of their teaching or whatnot, because after all, it was high stakes. They're going to be with you, and you've got to give them tenure after 6 years if they cut the mustard. Over my time, we only denied tenure, I think, to 2 people. And it was both for 0 research. They published nothing, not even book reviews while they were there, which showed me laziness in addition to a certain inability to just jump through the hoops and get things published. Not about brain power. Becoming a professor is 80% showing up. It's about jumping through the hoops. So any of you young people who want to be professors, jump through the hoops. You got to jump through the hoops. Now you need a little bit of luck. You got to be good, but most of it is getting through the hoops. And so I would say out of those we hired, we had about a 60 or 70% success rate, meaning 60 or 70% of them would be really good teachers and scholars. And out of that, more than half would leave, and we'd have to replace them. And a few just didn't make tenure because they just didn't have it. And boy, that was agonizing. Not so much for me, because I wouldn't hesitate to cut somebody who wasn't doing the job. But so many people want to give them another chance and another chance. And finally, you get to that 6th tenure year and you're out of chances. So a couple of times I was chairman, and one time I was chairman of an African-American search for African-American historian, teach African-American history. And I went to the chairman, who was a Black. He was not African-American, he was from Cameroon. And I said, I'm willing to chair this committee, but I don't care who they are. If they're white, Asian, polka dot, if they're the best, those are going to be the people we bring in for the interview. And he said, okay, no problem. So again, and we did, and an African-American woman turned out to be the best of the three we brought in. So that's how that process works. So back to this article from the Martin's Center for Excellence. And it was that we need to, now's the time to rejuvenate the history faculties. I don't see it happening. Right now, the very best history writing is occurring outside of history faculties. Ian Toll, T-O-L-L, wrote a prize-winning book on the 6 frigates built by the Federalists that went through the War of 1812. He then followed up with an amazing trilogy of World War II in the Pacific, the Navy in the Pacific, 3 books, fantastic. John McManus, he is an academic, but he mostly writes for the Army or Army history. And you don't have many military history programs out there at all anymore. We used to have lots of them. There's only like 2 or 3 schools that even have military history anymore. McManus has a trilogy on the Army in the Pacific. Very good. A guy named Adam Zamoyski, not an academician, wrote a fantastic book on the Congress of Vienna. Better than anything else that's out. Certainly better than Henry Kissinger's book on the Congress of Vienna. Andrew Roberts has done a couple of biographies of Napoleon and Churchill. Fantastic. Our very best American biographer is Ron Chernow, who wrote a book on Andrew Mellon, wrote a biography of Carnegie, wrote a biography of John D. Rockefeller. Great. Hamilton, his latest book is on Hamilton. Great, great work. Again, not an academician. And then yours truly, I'm no longer an academician. But even about 20 years ago, I stopped writing for academic journals and started writing for a popular audience because I wanted people to read it. So anyway, I just thought I would mention that. We won't do a whole lot on this, but I'll start this section on page 175. We rush like a comet into infinite space. Prior to the American Revolution, few white men had seen what lay beyond the endless mountains. In 1800, the Great Migration had begun in earnest, and American settlers poured into and settled the Trans-Appalachian West. Jefferson aimed to assist frontier immigrants by securing a free trade route down the entirety of the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico, requiring the United States of America to purchase the port of New Orleans. Jefferson's motives appeared solely economic, yet they were also based on strategic concerns and overriding agrarian philosophy that sought new outlets for America's frontier farmers. At the time, Jefferson sought to secure only the port of New Orleans itself. American purchase of all of Louisiana Territory came as a surprise to nearly everyone involved. Now, let me mention here a book called, hang on. Okay, my book called Democracy Betrayed by Nelson Dawson. This is not in the endnotes of Patriot's History. It's a new source that came to my attention, and I strongly recommend you take a look at it. He makes a strong argument that the Jeffersonians were motivated by slavery more than believed, that the Federalists were not, and that much of what Jefferson did here in acquiring Louisiana was done with an eye toward expansion of slavery. So take a look at his argument, Nelson Dawson, Democracy Betrayed. Spain, ever fearful of the American advance, had returned the Louisiana Territory to France in the secret Treaty of San Ildefonso, 1800, then later made it public. Napoleon Bonaparte, on his rise to become France's post-revolutionary emperor, promised the Spanish he would not sell Louisiana. He then immediately proceeded to do exactly that, convinced after a revolution in Haiti that he could not defend French possessions in the New World. He was right. French Navy got defeated soundly at the Battle of the Nile, then again at the Battle of Trafalgar, which was after sailed Louisiana. The British, ever anxious to weaken France, made the information of the 1801 treaty available to the envoy to England, Rufus King, who hastily passed the news on to Jefferson, America's minister to France. America's minister to France, Robert Livingston, was quickly authorized to negotiate for the right of deposit of American goods in New Orleans. Livingston got nowhere, at which point Jefferson dispatched his Virginia friend, James Monroe, to Paris to assist in the negotiations. Monroe arrived in Paris to parley, whereupon he was astounded to hear that Napoleon's minister, Talleyrand, asked, quote, "What will you give for the whole?" meaning all of Louisiana. By the whole, Talleyrand not only offered just New Orleans, but all the remaining Louisiana territory, that area draining the Mississippi River from the Rocky Mountains to the Mississippi, for $15 million, a sum that included $3 million in debts American citizens owed to the French. The actual price tag of Louisiana was astonishingly low. 11.2 million, or about 3 cents an acre, or less than 1/10 the cost of today's Louisiana Superdome in New Orleans. Jefferson's administration, which prided itself on fiscal prudence and strict adherence to the Constitution, now found itself in the awkward position of arguing that Hamiltonian means somehow justified Jeffersonian ends. Livingston and Monroe never had authority to purchase Louisiana nor spend 50% more than authorized, no matter what the bargain. In the dollars of the day, the expense of Louisiana was enormous, and nothing in the Constitution specifically empowered the federal government to purchase a territory beyond its boundaries, much less grant American citizenship to tens of thousands of French nationals who resided within that territory. After a little hand-wringing and inconsequential talk of constitutional amendments, however, the administration cast aside its fiscal and constitutional scruples. Minority Federalists erupted over the hypocrisy of this stance, and one cried in protest over spending, quote, $15 million for bogs, mountains, and Indians, $15 million for uninhabited wasteland, and a refuge for criminals. The Federalists no doubt appreciated the fact that this new land would also become a cradle for numerous Jeffersonian Republican senators and congressmen representing a number of new agricultural slave states. Jefferson typically framed the argument in more philosophical terms. Louisiana would become, quote, an empire of liberty, populated by farmers who just happened to vote for his party. In the end, the majority Republicans prevailed, and of the 32 U.S. senators, only 6 arch-federalists voted against Louisiana Purchase. In a telling example of the self-destructive nature of old federalism, Fisher Ames wrote gloomily, quote, "Now by adding this unmeasured world beyond the Mississippi, we rush like a comet into infinite space. In our wild career, we may jostle some of the world out of its orbit, but we shall in any event quench the light of our own." Boy, was he wrong. Now, as Dawson argues, by the 1840s and 50s, much of this land was being fought over as an expansion of slave territory. Stephen Douglas especially would argue that they needed to open all the territory to slaves or slavery. So it's ironic that Jefferson's Empire of Liberty really could have become an empire of slavery if not for the actions of a number of great and heroic Americans. Even before receiving senatorial approval for Louisiana Purchase, Jefferson secretly ordered a military expedition to explore, map, and report on the new territory and its boundaries. The president chose his personal aide, U.S. Army Captain Meriwether Lewis, to head the force, making sure that the captain was sufficiently attuned to the scientific inquiries that had captivated Jefferson his entire life. Lewis, a combat veteran and woodsman who possessed considerable intellect, went to Philadelphia for a crash course in scientific method and biology under Charles Wilson Peel prior to departure. For its co-leader, Lewis chose William Clark, an affable red-headed soldier and much younger brother of Revolutionary hero George Rogers Clark. The two spent the winter of 1803-04 encamped on the Mississippi at Wood River, directly across from French St. Louis. Official word of the Louisiana Purchase arrived, and in May 1804, Lewis and Clark led their 50-man Corps of Discovery across the Mississippi and up the Missouri River, bound for the unknown lands of the North American Great Plains. Lewis and Clark aimed to follow the Missouri River to its headwaters in present-day western Montana. While encamped near present-day Bismarck, North Dakota, during the winter of 1804 and 5, they met and hired a pregnant Indian woman, Sacagawea, and her husband, Toussaint Charbonneau, to act as their translators and guides. After an arduous upriver journey, the Corps arrived in the summer of 1805 at the Missouri's headwaters, ending serious discussion of the all-water Northwest Passage to Asia. You remember, this is like a Shangri-La. There is supposed to be this mysterious water route all the way across North America. Some thought it was the St. Lawrence, which ended, of course, in the Great Lakes, but others thought it might be the Mississippi, and then the Missouri would go all the way to the Pacific Ocean. No, didn't happen. So the Northwest Passage was finally shot down. Then the expedition crossed the Rocky Mountains, leaving the western bounds of Louisiana Purchase. Near their base, the western base of the Rockies, Sacagawea secured horses for the explorers, and they rode onto the Columbia Plateau in the late fall. Sailing down the Snake and Columbia rivers, Lewis and Clark arrived at the Pacific Ocean on November 7th and promptly carved by land from the U states in 1804 and 1805 on a tree. They wintered on the Oregon coast and returned east, arriving to a hero's welcome in St. Louis, Missouri, September 1806. Lewis and Clark's great journey has become legendary, and a reading of Lewis and Clark's extensive journals today reveals not only Jefferson's strategic and economic motives, but other more idealistic motives as well. President Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark west in search of scientific data to further man's knowledge, and at the same time to explore what he dreamed would become an expanded expanded agrarian American republic. Other American adventurers headed west to explore the new Louisiana Territory. In 1806, U.S. Army Captain Zebulon Pike led an official expedition up the Arkansas River to what is now Colorado, then attempted but failed to climb Pike's Peak. Like Lewis and Clark's, Pike's expedition set out with keenly defined instructions for what the government sought to find, making it truly an exploration as opposed to a discovery expedition. Uncle Sam expected political, diplomatic, economic, and scientific fruits from its expenditures, and Congress routinely shared this information with the public in a series of some 60 reports. However, the most fascinating probe of the West in all these years came not from an official U.S. expedition, but from an illegal and treasonous foray into the West by none other than former Vice President Aaron Burr. So next time we will pick up with Aaron Burr and the duel that scarred the Republic. Let me remind you, if you're on the Wild World of History site, be a VIP member. I'm constantly adding new stuff. I just added a new Integrity Winston Churchill episode last week. I think we're up to 7 now. I added a Reagan episode about 3 weeks ago. If you're on the Wild World of Politics and you want my political commentary, which follows this show every day at the Wild World of Politics only, check out The Insider, and you'll get my Larry's commentary 3 days a week, and you'll get a new series called Globalism Then and Now, and I'm up to 7 episodes in that series. You also, on both sites, get Reagan, the American president, Horrible History of Howard Zinn, Enduring Lessons on Life and Citizenship, and the 1620 Default, Why the 1619 Project is Wrong. You'll also get my ebook, All Thumbs, How Our Obsession with Phones and Devices is Damaging Our Kids and Restructuring Our Lives. No, it's not a call to burn your iPhone. It's a way for you to more appropriately manage your kids' phones and devices. There's also access in either the VIP or the Insider to 40 hours of the Wild Wednesday webcasts, where for almost 2 years I did a different historical topic every night on things from Napoleon to the Great Depression to World War II in the Pacific to UFOs in history to the Kennedy assassination to the Crusades. You'll love these. There's over 40 hours of these, so check those out. So it would be worth your while for $6 a month, $69 a year to join either the Wild World of History or VIP or the Wild World of Politics Insider. Meanwhile, I'm trying to turn Patriot's history into a feature film. Our next milestone is we need to hire a line producer. We'll have a script, a 2-scene script. We now need to pay a professional to tell us exactly how much that's going to cost. It's harder than you think. That's what we're raising money for right now. Help out. Buy me a coffee. Buy me 10 coffees. Only $5, right? If you can do it, buy me 100 coffees. We've got people are buying me 500 coffees because they want to help out and they want to see this become the next Sound of Freedom. We can do that. Help me out. I will see you guys back here on Wednesday.